Hello everyone, and thanks for coming back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at these budget or entry-level goggles, the Eachine EW30s. They are a 2-inch LCD screen, and you can see there that we have the round. You've got a little bit of grease from me on there. And the goggles are pretty typical, but something that when I got these goggles, I kind of thought back to when I not first got started, but I still have, I think it was my second or third pair of goggles that I used way back in the day, and some of you will remember these if you've been around long enough. Do you know what brand this is? It's been rebranded a few times. Kylan Vision goggles, and these were actually pretty good goggles. I think at the time they were around $100, but of course they didn't have any sort of diversity, whether antenna or receiver. You had to hack in a DVR. You had to hack in this power button. I put that power button in, so otherwise you had to pop the top plate every time and unplug the battery. And so these were about 3 years ago, maybe only 2.5 years ago, and these were kind of one of my favorite goggles. But if you look, I don't know if I can even got them both in frame. Look at the massive size difference. Here, let me turn them around a little bit. Look at the size difference. Now this I did get these out, power them back up, and take another look. I would say the resolution or the image quality, the pixel density on both of these is about the same, but this one has a much larger screen. Of course, this is only a 2-inch, and I believe this was 3-inch. I don't even know if they still sell these under any brand, but you can see it's a massive size difference, just huge. And that's one of the things that I thought I should highlight with this goggle, is because you might be looking at these goggles as a ride-along set, something to take to the park with you. So if somebody were to be walking the dog, you could show them what you're doing and maybe win a friend. Or if you have someone in your life that you want to introduce to FPV but don't want to spend a lot of money, this goggle might be a good fit. Some of the features, it's pretty basic or generic, but it has all the features we'd expect. It does come with 2 RPSMA antennas, linear antennas, just like this, and this is what I used in the video when we watched some DVR and some flight footage. We've got menu buttons for, if you long press here, that will automatically search, and it does a reasonable job. It's not as good as much more expensive goggles. On this side, we've got the power button right here next to my thumb, and then we've got a plus up here, if you can see that, and a minus down here, which gets us into different menus and activations, and then we've got the mode key over here. Now if you long press plus, that activates the DVR so that you can record, and then if you press it again, that will make it stop. This mode, or the M key over here, gets you into the settings so that you can manipulate the contrast and brightness and sharpness. It really only has those 3 settings. And the menu color they use is a kind of a teal or a turquoise. It's kind of hard to see unless you've got a really dark background, of course. The OSD that displays in the goggles, as you see, is kind of annoying because it's awful large and it covers up stuff, but that's something you might have to make concessions about where you put your OSD elements, like as you see with mine. Some things are getting covered up there. It comes with a 1,000 milliamp battery, which is probably located right up front. That's traditionally the place where they put these things. We do have a micro SD port right there for charging, and they do include a cable. We've got an auxiliary port right there. One thing I do want to draw your attention to is this little pen hole right here. That is your reset if the machine or if the visor were to lock up and not start up, or not to shut down, or some other problem. That's the reset. I haven't had an opportunity or a need to use that, but it's kind of like the old CD-ROM days when the band that ejected your CD-ROM tray broke. You could shove that down in there. I always used a paper clip, just kind of straightened it out and pushed it down in there. The SD card you put in right over here. It is spring loaded. It is not protected from coming out in any way, shape, or form. And then we go back to the dial, which you may have been eyeballing here, and if we look closely, hopefully I can display this, you'll see that it moves, which I found to be a useful feature. Now, you don't get any depth change, and that's the thing about goggles, is there's some things that we can't necessarily predict, and in a review video like this, it's always best that I suggest to you, and if you have the opportunity, that you go and find someone with the goggles, whether it's a local hobby shop, a flying crew, go to your local AMA field, see if you can find somebody by chance that's doing FPV out there. I know that's rare, but maybe by chance you run into someone. You can look up on Facebook to see if there's anybody in your area. Goggle fitment, and if they work for your vision, is always a bit risky. I'm even hearing about the new Fat Shark goggles that if you have long eyelashes, that can be problematic, that the oils from those eyelashes can get on the lenses. Now, in this particular case, you see I've got a fingerprint on my lens right there, not a big deal. I did experience some light leak, especially through the nose, but the nose cutout is fairly large. You've probably seen my nose on the channel a few times, so you can make a judgment of whether or not my nose is small or large. But I did experience some light leak. You can also get some felt or some foam. It's not included, but if you were to experience light leak, you can just lay a bit of that in there. There's some neoprene stuff that's real nice. Now, I found that these goggles were very light, so that we should weigh them. The website has these at 200 grams. I suspect that's without the strap, and I'm getting 228 grams on my scale. I can't even weigh the other goggles that I started the video with because my scale only goes up to 500 grams. They're well beyond that. These are nothing. I think they're just for heat dissipation. And it could be, I haven't torn these down, but there's no indication, so I suspect it's just one receiver with dual antennas. So in that case, you probably wouldn't need both antennas connected all the time, but it sure wouldn't hurt you. And yes, when I do the testing that I'm about to show you, I do use these linear and whip antennas. So what I experienced, you should be able to experience as well. Now, one thing I wanted to do that was a little bit different is I've done a few goggle reviews and just kind of told you about them. And so I wanted to show you how these, which has a much bigger field of view than my Fat Shark goggles. So if you like field of view, you like really wide field of view, especially if you, I hear people that do planes really enjoy a really wide field of view. This may be something you want to consider because it is a very immersive view inside there. I should step back. The foam is a little bit different. It feels, as far as the density, it's not unusual, it's not hard, it's not particularly soft, but whatever this material is they have on the outside, it feels a little bit softer than I felt in the past when it comes to Eachine goggles. And the plastic is surprisingly, it just feels solid. It doesn't feel like it's going to fall apart. You know, as I twist it here, you don't hear it creaking like you do a lot of times when you have cheap plastic or things that aren't well put together. So at $49.99, which is the current price, you know, the price goes up, the price goes down. I'll put a link down in the video description if you would like to check out the price and the specs yourself. So far, my experience with this has been very, very positive. I've been pretty happy with it. But let's go into that flight footage so that you can see how it impacted my flight. If you haven't seen me fly before, and this is a flight inside the house, this is actually before I went on vacation, before Christmas, you might want to watch some other video, maybe the Mobula 6 video or the B-Brain brushless video, so you get a feel for how I fly, and then you can see how it impacts me. It's not necessarily part of this review, but I thought it would be something interesting to bring to the table in a goggle review. How does it impact someone who's come from, I fly the SkyZone 030 goggles, which are $400 goggles, versus flying these. So let's roll that footage. So we've got the B-Brain brushless, and I'm going to start off and I'm going to have a little crash. This is actually my first flight with it. So I'm having to adjust. I didn't go into this first flight with it with the idea that I would actually bring this DVR footage to the channel in some manner, but after kind of evaluating how I've evaluated goggles and trying to relay my experience, I thought this would be a pretty good measure. So we just got started. We had that one crash. I do think I have one more coming up before I finally kind of start to make that adjustment between that super wide field of view of these goggles versus the goggles that I typically wear. And I also, just as a proof of concept, I go ahead and I fly by myself, and at the end of the flight, you'll also see where I am actually wearing the goggles. Just kind of proof of concept that I'm wearing them, even though I wasn't planning it. I just thought it was a fun thing to do. Was something I don't do is include myself in the DVR footage very much at all. Okay, we had our second crash, so I should start to get things under control and start to fly a little bit better. Keep in mind, first flight, I'm flying the Acro B-Brain brushless in the house, and so you can go back and watch that video if you want to compare it, the flight footage to the flight footage that you may have seen in the review video versus this, to see how it impacted me. But you see the reception's pretty good. Now, my house likes FPV for some reason. The construction, the openness, my old Wi-Fi, my house likes FPV. But what I'm going to do is, to give you some idea of what the range is, we're going to actually show it outside against the SkyZone. $400 goggles. And while we're here, I should mention that the DVR does record at 30 frames a second, or The DVR varies a little bit at 29.87, 29.79, so right around that 29 frames per second marker, and it is 640 by 480. The bit rate is around 23,000 kilobits per second. And you can see the flight ended, and I peek around the edge of that little plant, and you get to see that I'm wearing the goggles. So I'm double dipping here a little bit. This is actually footage that I have used from the Mobula 6 range test, testing the SPI receiver and the VTX reception outside. We've got Jello on that Mobula 6, but that's not what this video is about. It's about the goggles, so I've got those labeled on screen so you can do a comparison between $400 goggles and $49 goggles. And again, I'm running them with the stock antennas. I didn't do anything special. I'm not actually wearing these EW30 goggles, so they're at a little bit of a disadvantage because they're lower. And I'm going to do my typical, if you've seen it before, the footage where I go over to my neighbor's house and then I go below grade or below ground level per where I'm sitting. And now the Mobula 6, in my test, in this test, the range was very, very oddly good. I have had reports that people have experienced fail-safes in certain orientations of the antenna. But as far as the VTX goes, you get an idea of what the reception's like on versus Sky Zone goggles. And you can see that there's a fair bit of breakup on the EW30s. But that's still, that's pretty reasonable, you guys. You know, it's hard for me to argue against getting these. I think the one thing that's always a big variable when it comes down to getting goggles is, are they going to work for you if they're your first pair of goggles, and if they're a backup set of goggles. Helping someone with the IPD adjustment, that might be something you kind of have to teach them or maybe do for them. They could also be a great set of goggles just to have around for flying if someone, maybe you have buddies that fly and, you know, somebody's goggles goes down or their battery flakes out or something like that. You can have a handy set that's relatively compact and relatively inexpensive in order to help a buddy get going again in that particular case. But overall, I was pretty happy with these goggles, and I was pretty surprised. For those that don't know, I do wear glasses. My prescription is very, very light. I don't have any special astigmatism or anything like that. I just have a little bit of an issue when it comes to viewing things at distance. I did review the Eachine, the 800DM goggles. I was not a fan of those. I couldn't get them to focus, and I just couldn't get them to focus. Nothing that I did. And then I tested them with some other people in my household, my kids and my wife, and they really couldn't give me any solid feedback about whether or not it was in focus for them. They're just not used to it. But these I found were in focus, and it looked right. It looked clear. It looked to be what I expected. I do think the colors were a little bit washed out, as you'll be able to see in this footage that we're playing of me actually sticking my camera in the lens as best as I can to show you what it looks like internally. And this is, again, the camera's interpretation of the view of the goggles, not necessarily your naked eye. So my explanation versus what you see in this recording might be slightly different. But I did think that the screen didn't have all bright colors. It wasn't very sharp. Again, I'm comparing it to my $400 Sky Zone goggles that have OLED panels in them versus this 2-inch LCD panel with a Fresnel lens in it. So it's not really fair, but I'm just trying to convey as much as I can to you about this. The DVR does play the footage that you record from the DVR. It's a little bit clunky getting into it, and I'm not going to dive real deep into all the different functions of the DVR and settings. I just wanted to give you an idea about the screens and the fitment and the reception, which are really the primary points when you're looking at goggles. I think these goggles, or at least the particular set that I have, are very serviceable. They're the kind of goggle that I think that at $49, I would say there's pretty good value in it, and it's going to help me be able to shrink, if I do travel with any of my quads, be able to shrink the amount of luggage or packaging that I have to have with me in order to be able to have a backup set of goggles for one of my kids or anyone else who might come along to want to watch me fly. I'll have a link in the video description to the goggles to see if that $49 price point has changed or not. If you're interested, you can also read some of the specs. Maybe some of the other people off of Banggood have done reviews of their own, and you can read those or watch those as well. Some additional information if you care to. I know when it's a first pair of goggles, you want everything. You want to make sure every dollar counts, and I have an appreciation for that. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.